An overview of the various types of human rights. Globalization and labor rights. Labor rights are human rights which encompass the right to collective bargaining, the elimination of forced and slave labor, the abolition of child labor, and the eradication of any forms of discrimination at the workplace. Globalization is the growing interpenetration of states, markets, communications, and ideas across borders. 2 points of view have created tension between globalization and labor rights. On one hand, businesses need to be competitive, thus requiring labor rights to be flexible, while on the other hand, labor rights have to be guaranteed at all times. Proponents of liberal trade argue that for businesses to be able to offer consumers quality products at a cheap price, workers need to be more productive, as this will in turn spur economic growth and improve the standard of living. This view suggests that tough labor laws are a hindrance to economic success and better living conditions, which can be improved by the intensification of trade exchanges, which would eventually foster better employment opportunities for workers. Supporters of solid labor rights argue that while globalization enhances economic growth and working conditions in third world countries, it leads to deterioration of working conditions in developed countries. Globalization demands increased labor flexibility and competitiveness, which has led to the adoption of labor conditions that violate basic human rights. Tenets of strong labor rights argue that developing countries compete to offer loose working conditions and minimum salary standards, while making unionization of workers particularly difficult to attract a wider source of foreign investment. This strategy renders workers in developed countries less competitive, thus having to lower their salary demands and at the same time accept poorer working conditions. Thus, labor rights have to be protected by all means to overturn this race to the bottom situation for labor rights. In developing countries, economic growth is of paramount importance, thus these governments prioritize economic growth over political freedom. They argue that the principal comparative advantage of their countries resides in the availability of a large pool of surplus cheap labor, as well as in the generally lax labor standards. Thus, strict adherence to tough labor laws would interfere with this advantage. In conclusion, to reverse this race to the bottom, the two opposing ideologies have to be reconciled to enhance economic growth in developing countries while protecting the labor rights already gained in developed countries. Development of gender rights. Human rights are the fundamental freedoms and rights to which all humans are entitled simply for being human. One can trace the development of women's rights as human rights through 3 stages: sex-based rights, gender-based rights, and contemporary gender rights. Sex-based rights. Sex is the biological distinction of human beings as male or female, and was one of the bases on which basic human rights were not to be denied. The first stage of gender rights was idealized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, which was based on the fact that all human beings possess certain equal and inalienable rights. It would have been virtually impossible for women to promote their gender-based rights if universal equality was not captured at this early stage. 3 human rights were advocated for women: political, economic, and social rights. Politically, women gain the right to vote and stand for public office in elections just like men. Economically, women gain the right to earn equal remunerations for equal work. On the social front, women could now enter into marriage freely, start a family, and possess equal rights during marriage and at its dissolution. Gender-based rights. Gender can be defined as those characteristics of men and women that are socially constructed. A new concept of women's rights was born in the 1970s, where there was a need to address issues particular to women, resulting from gender differences in cultural and traditional practices. This allowed special attention to issues that are unique to women only. Advocates of women's rights argued that though women legally had all the rights, they faced structural and systemic constraints such that their freedom of choice was hindered. Contemporary gender rights. These rights were conceptualized at the Beijing +5 conference of 2000, where it was concluded that the gender rights agenda required readjustment as a result of the changed global economic, technological, and security environments. This would allow attention to be paid to modern issues that tend to derail women's rights, such as HIV, AIDS, child rights, rape, and other crimes that are focused on women. In conclusion, it is evident that the fight for women's rights is not a destination but rather a journey that started with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 and continues today.